Hi everybody, my name's Dave Schade. I'm the director of the Division of Ag. So welcome to Tuesdays at 1 o'clock when we're doing our Facebook Lives. So today I have Rusty Foreaker here. He's an agronomist out at the Plant Materials Center. So we're going to be talking about gardening and varieties. But before we get started, Rusty, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that came up in the last week that's important to farmers. And the first is that the Disaster Loan Program, the IDL program that SBA's had in the past, has never been allowed for farming and agricultural products. I want you guys to know right now SBA has opened up that loan program for agricultural businesses, and that's the program that the first $10,000 up to $10,000 of that loan is forgivable. So a really good program for people to look at, and along with the payroll protection plan. So we're trying to make sure that people in the agricultural community know about these COVID related programs that can help. And the other is, I just want to remind people that we've stood up our industrial hemp program. And I've been a little surprised at how slow some of the retail applications have been coming in, and we're starting to stand that up. And we're going to be starting into enforcement here in a couple of months. And so it's going to be really important that people know, if you want to grow, if you want to process, and above all, you have to have an endorsement. You have to endorse products, and you have to have a retail registration to sell these products. So as we're standing this program up, we're still in the warning phase and letting people know that they need to do this. But there have been some enforcement actions taken when people were found to have product now. So it's time to remind everybody that we're processing those, about 10-day turnaround. So we need you to do that. So with that, we're trying to keep these kind of focused on items and issues of interest. Rusty has been doing field trials out at the PMC and over at with the research farm we have here in Palmer for a lot of years. So Rusty, if you could give your presentation, that would be great. I know you have a lot of information to get to today.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Hello, everyone. So we're going to do some basic guidelines on planting your garden. So when you want to start up your garden, you need to make sure that you start early enough. And unfortunately, right now we're a little late to give you all the guidelines you need to be able to start. But some people are probably have all of their starts ready to go and waiting for that ground to be ready. But the first thing you want to do is actually plan for your coming up year. And so you need to select a location that is going to do well for a garden. You want to make sure that you have ample sunlight. You want to try to avoid any low spots where you might get frost early, and then we're also going to be talking more in extent about crop selection, but that's a big thing that you want to do in your planning, is figure out what crops you want to grow. There's a lot of information available on our website, on CES's website, which is the Cooperative Extension Service. You can contact your local agents, and they have people who are available to help you with those variety selections also. We've done some extensive variety trialing over years. There's a few publications that are available with CES for certain locations, such as interior, the best varieties to use, the South Central region. We've also done some research trials at the PMC. Over the time, we've done asparagus, cauliflower, broccoli, and hopefully we will be able to continue some more in the future. The next thing you need to do is, once you have your selections made, you need to purchase your seed if you're going to be starting from seed. You need to get this early enough, that way you can start your seed and have the transplants large enough to plant into your garden once it's ready. Some crops are actually where you might be starting them as early as February or March in your house or in a greenhouse if you have it. And because those crops take a lot longer to establish to be able to plant into the ground. Some actually where you can just direct sow them also, so those you can actually wait till when your garden is ready. Also design. You're going to want to look at setting up to where you have ample light to all of your crops. So if you have tall crops like Brussels sprouts, you don't want them to shadow out, say, your lettuce crop, which is going to be more of a low growing. And so you want to be able to have it to where everything gets plenty enough sunshine as you need. And then you also want to be able to continually rotate your crops. Even if you have the smallest garden or a large garden, We always recommend to keep disease down in your garden, to move your crops around from year to year. So that would be where don't plant, say, a brassica in the same spot every year, which would be your broccoli, your cabbage. And then so once time progresses, you're ready for your preparation. And the number one thing I recommend, doesn't matter what size garden, is a soil test. Soil tests are very pertinent to know what is in the soil that is available for your plants. Can be very wasteful just to throw down a fertilizer that you have no idea what is readily available for the plants, so you could be wasting money. Also, you could be over-fertilizing. There is toxicity problems at times too. And one of the number one things to remember is always request for a Malic 3 test. This is because of our soils, it is hard to determine what phosphorus is available, and a Malic 3 will be able to determine that. Once you have your test results, I recommend contacting the Cooperative Extension Service. They have personnel who can read your analysis report and give you recommendations for your crops. We are also available at the Plant Materials Center that we can do that too. Several different laboratories are available for testing. They are out of state, so there are guidelines to where they usually have on their websites how to prepare your soil test for shipping it to them, how to even collect random soil samples. And those should be showing up now. Brookside Laboratories, Midwest Laboratories, A&L Western Laboratories, International Ag Labs. Those are just a few that are available. We usually use Brookside, not as a preferential, but they seem to be pretty easy to work with. So your next step would then be to sow your seeds for your transplants. And basically, you're going to look at your crop and figure out when the maturity time is and how long you need to grow your transplants before they're ready to go into the garden. And I always recommend that you just don't take them out into the garden and throw them in. You want to harden them off. So make sure you put them outside, indirect sunlight, protected area for so many days. Start gradually introducing them to the sunlight more, and then you'll be able to plant them out into the garden, and they should be able to survive. Once your garden is ready to work, such as the breakup is over, the soil is drained, it's not a muddy muck, you can get into your garden, cultivate the ground. Once you have your recommendations from CES or the PMC for your amendments, at this time you would start to work those into the soil, whether it be lime to bring your pH up. We always have pretty low pH soils around in Alaska, and most garden crops prefer a more neutral base, so a neutral soil. Then you can also prepare your beds. If you're going to be doing raised beds, you can also do plasticulture. Plasticulture is using a plastic as a weed barrier. There's different ones out there. We have IRT available, which actually uses the solar radiation to heat the soils. Some people use black plastic. Some crops like having clear plastic, such as sweet corn, because it will warm the soils up faster. And then it's time where most of the garden stores are open and available to buy your transplants if you don't want to start them yourself. You can find them at box stores, at garden centers. They have many different varieties and different crops that are available to plant in your garden. So once your ground is ready and worked, we're ready to go out into the garden and plant. Now, you've already designed it, you know where they're going to go, so you're going to plant your crop in the location that you've decided. Several things that I mentioned: crop rotation, make sure that you aren't planting them in the same spot year after year. Then you're going to be looking at each individual crop and saying what the spacing is. And spacing is very important because some plants get quite large, and if you start to space them too close together, you're going to end up with smaller plants. So say broccoli crop. You could plant broccoli, say 8 inches apart, but your heads are going to be somewhat small, maybe like what you would find at the supermarket, where some people will plant the broccoli at 12 inches on centers, and they can get broccoli heads the size of dinner plates. So each crop is its own specific spacing requirement. Succession planting is another thing that you can do also with very short maturity crops such as lettuce. You could plant lettuce out once a week or once every 2 weeks, and all year long as it's mature, you'll be able to harvest your lettuce and have it all summer long. So now we're going to get into a little more extensive crop selection. And one thing that I always recommend, some people now, we have high tunnels all over the state. If you have a high tunnel, don't plant crops in your high tunnel that can be grown outside in Alaska. It's a high dollar space in a high tunnel, so if it can grow outside, leave it outside. Put something that is more valuable inside that high tunnel that would need that extension, such as a tomato or a cucumber. So for your outdoors, we're going to start out with a perennial crop. We actually did a variety trial at the PMC in several different locations across the state, trying to determine certain varieties that would survive well in Alaska. Not necessarily on yield or harvesting, but we wanted to know what would do well and survive. And some of those varieties that we found did really well was Jersey Giant, Jersey Gem, Millennium, and Jersey Night. These are all hybrid asparagus that are available by seed or even crowns that you can transplant. They're dormant crowns that they can ship to you, and then you can just plant them in. Make sure your site is prepared well in advance before planting asparagus, and you can have a continual crop of asparagus year after year, and sometimes for many years. Beans. Most of the time people grow snap beans here in Alaska. Drying beans don't really perform as well. So some of the top varieties that we found through CES's research and some of my own is Provider is an excellent green bean for fresh eating and canning. And Royal Burgundy is a purple one, but when cooked it will turn green. And Rock Door is a good yellow wax bean. One of the things to note on beans is usually you'll direct sow them, and our soils are very cool. Through research, it's been found that a dark colored bean will germinate a lot faster and better in our soils. And so Provider is an excellent one, and Rock Door is another with a darker bean color. Beets. Beets grow well in Alaska. There are a lot of variety of beets. A lot of the varieties will do well, but some of the ones that have been noted for better performance are Red Ace, Detroit Red. If you want to go exotic, if you want to say, there are different colors of beets out there. There's whites, there's striped, there's yellows, and Chioggia or Guards Mark is one that has a bullseye pattern that's red and white striped. Touchstone Gold is a yellow golden beet that performs well. For broccoli, there are a lot of different broccoli varieties, but you'll need to pay attention to maturity times. You'll also need to pay attention to whether or not they are meant for a warmer season or a cool season. Warmer temperatures, broccoli tends to bolt or flower. And we found that Green Magic performs really well, and it is a nice green small bead head that does really well. Arcadia is a later variety but still performs well, and it's a duller green but has a very unique frosted appearance on the beads. Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are a difficult one. They are a long maturing crop, and it is a one that has to be started as a transplant. So you need to start those early enough, and then you're able to get them into the ground. Some of those varieties are Jade Cross. That's an old variety that was on CES's publication. Some other new ones are Dagan and Churchill, and they perform pretty well. Most of those have a 70 to 80 day maturity time. Cabbage. So we have different types of cabbage. We have storage, we have fresh market, and the great thing for Alaska is cabbage grows really well. You can get very large heads, and if you get those really good storage varieties, you're able to store them for a very long period. This past winter, I had some Bartolo, which was a fantastic storage, very dense head, And I was able to still have cabbage all the way up until April of this year with the proper storage. Tierra is a good fresh market one. And then if you're looking for a red cabbage, Ruby Perfection seems to be one that's readily available and does well and is a storage type. For those of you looking for making sauerkraut so you can preserve your cabbage, Caitlin is a high dry matter, very dense head, and does very well in making sauerkraut. For carrots, carrots are obviously one of Alaska's favorite crops because they're the sweetest carrots there are. And many of the varieties that are on CES's website, some of them are no longer available. And you'll tend to find that year after year, varieties change all the time. The ones that we know do really well all of a sudden disappear. They're no longer commercially available, and then there's all these new hybrids. So Mokum is one that is recently available that is known to replace Nelson, which was a old variety that was used very often. Scarlet Nantes is another one that's available. And the Nantes are very good storage carrots. For cauliflower, we did a variety trial that was in 2014, I believe, and 2015. And we tried out 35 different varieties. And some of the ones that I found did the best were Candid Charm. That was a beautiful, bright white head, very dense. Casper was another one. Synergy, I had almost record size heads, which were very good. If you're looking for color, then of course Gravity, which is a purple one, is a very good one to go with. And if you're looking for a yellow one, then Cheddar. For celery, which is another crop that needs to be started early, they get them well established before you transplant them out into the garden. And Utah 5270 is a known variety for many years here in Alaska. Recently last year I tried out Kelvin and Victoria, and they also did very well. For greens and also kale, most varieties do well. There are many different types of kale and collards and mustards and leaf type, whether it's frilly, curled, red, green, but most of those will do well. For kohlrabi, a lot of people don't even know what kohlrabi is, but it's the hidden gem. Kohlrabi is a fantastic crop. And I did some research this past year and found a couple of varieties that were the sweetest kohlrabi I've ever had. Lech is one of those, that's L-E-C-H. And then Tarek. Another known old one that has been grown by a lot of growers in Alaska is Early Vienna. And then if you're looking for color in those, there are purple varieties available. And Osier Star is one of those. And Beas, B-E-A-S, is a white variety. Instead of having the green stem, it's all white. For lettuce, there are many varieties of lettuce, and lettuce just performs well in Alaska because of the cool seasons. I will say that with our summers getting warmer as they have in the last couple of years, that you'll want to watch your lettuce crop so that it doesn't bolt. Make sure you get it harvested in time before the warm season comes in, where it can bolt in 24 hours before you know it. All of a sudden your lettuce is pretty much wasted. For peas, the couple of different peas, we have snap peas and shelling peas. And the snap peas are the edible pods and have a high sugar content. And some of those varieties are Sugar Ann, Super Sugar Snap, which is extremely sweet. And another one is a PLS 141. For the shelling peas, one of my favorites is Green Arrow. Has an excellent flavor, but others that have been known to do well are Premium and Strike. Radish. I'm not really going to list any varieties for radish. The only thing I have to recommend on radish is that with our long days, they will tend to bolt. So make sure that you plant them early before the days get too long. You can do sequential plantings, But once we get our longer days, they tend to bolt pretty quickly, and you can't really get any substantial root size out of them. And spinach is another one, where the long days tend to make the plants bolt pretty quick. For squash, we can actually grow summer and winter squash up here, which is pretty nice. The summer squash you get to eat fresh. The winter squash you can store for some time, and if you store it properly, it will last for some months. And for the summer squash, we have some zucchini types: Black Beauty, Noche, and even yellow zucchini, which is, we have Gold Rush, Golden Glory. A good summer yellow squash is Gold Prize, which is a straight neck yellow summer squash. For winter squash, Gold Nugget, a spaghetti squash, and most of the Hubbards do pretty well. Sweet corn. As I said earlier, sweet corn really likes warm soils, so a lot of people use a clear polyethylene plastic to help warm those soils up. They can also be done in high tunnels where you have your season extension. And sweet corn, there are several different varieties or cultivars out there, but what you're looking for is a short maturity time and something that can do better in northern latitudes. And there are a few hybrids that have been developed for that. For tomatoes, most of the time people think tomatoes need to be grown out or inside. There are some tomato varieties that were developed in Alaska, part of the Polar series, where John Holm out of Fairbanks developed these. You have Polar Baby, Polar Beauty, Polar Gem. They will perform outside and be able to set fruit in cooler temperatures. Another set of varieties are the Sarajevo varieties out of Russia that were developed, I believe, back in the 1920s. And they like cold soils. You can plant them in the ground, and they will flower fruit even at 40-degree temperatures. So they do pretty well. And a lot of those are more canning type tomatoes. They may not be the best fresh eating tomatoes, but you can use them for canning and use them year round. So also, some of these warmer tip crops, you don't necessarily have to grow in a high tunnel or a greenhouse, but you could even do container gardening. And some of these things, such as artichokes, tomatoes, peppers, you can try these in containers in a nice sunny location, and they will still perform. The only problem is sometimes our night temperatures are a little cool, so you may be delayed in some of the flower set and fruit set. And then for high tunnels and greenhouses, just about all of your cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes will do well in those areas. And some are specifically developed or hybridized for greenhouse production, where some are parthenocarpic, which means that they actually don't have to have cross-pollination, to where that cross-pollination is what forms seeds, and you can still get fruit off of those. There are some cucumbers that are that way, a lot of English varieties, and there are even some zucchini squash that are that way to be grown inside. And then you don't need to worry about your pollinators. So now, once you've had all of that planted and your season goes well, and then you reap the harvest. But what do you do with it? Some of these things are only best eaten fresh, but you can actually do a lot with these to last even longer if you have a large enough harvest. And so you have multiple different options. You have canning, freezing, or even just preserving through dehydration with some of these crops. And so for canning, there are multiple, I'm not the expert on these, so I'm going to give you some links, some resources that you can go to get just about all the information you need. And for canning, you can go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and they have a lot of great information on there. The Cooperative Extension has a vast amount of information through publications and even a specific site on food health for canning and preserving. Then there's the options of blanching and freezing. And the CES, they also have some information with publications for that. And then there's also the Alaska Master Gardeners. They have a blog where they have a lot of great information. For the preservation and dehydrating, you can go to the Property Extension website and you can find some information on that. And I guess we could go with questions if we have them, Dave.
Just a few. So you kept talking about bolting. So why don't you explain that?
Okay.
Because some of us know what it means, but I'm sure there's a few that might.
It's not the hardware, the nuts and bolts, but so there are certain plants that are, if you want to say, photoperiod sensitive.
Mhm.
And what that means is with a certain amount of daylight and a certain amount of night will induce flowering. And so for plants that when they flower, or a lot of times we'll call it bolting because it's an early flowering where it's not expected. And before you know it, all of a sudden you have a large flower spike and flower set and you don't really have anything to harvest.
Okay, great. So, looking at, say in South Central here with this year, about how much longer do you think before people should start hardening? Just a thumbnail. I mean, I know we're a little late this year. It depends on the area, but,
Well, for our climate right now, it's been, we're still getting cold nights,
Right.
To even some frosts. And for South Central, I usually recommend, dependent upon the crop, some crops such as your cold crops, your cool season crops, broccolis, cabbage, those transplants could be placed outside maybe by May 15th and give you about 7 to 10 days. Usually I'll plant those right around the Memorial Day. And there are others, though, that you want to wait until probably June 1st because not a guarantee, but we don't usually get a frost or a hard enough frost
Right.
to damage them by after June 1st.
Okay, that's a good thumbnail. And I know the further north you go, the more challenging it is and the later it is.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
southeast is, they don't get
Well,
so
then
cold. So
they
they're in a
then they
whole
have
other-
the rain and the wetness to deal with. But
Right,
in
so-
the interior, I usually recommend June 1 no matter what, before
Okay.
you start putting things outside to leave out.
Right. And the one thing I think you've said over and over, but the cooperative extension folks are all around the state. And so call your local extension agent and they're gonna know a lot more about the current conditions and the current area and give you that
Absolutely.
advice there. So,
Absolutely. They actually have a horticulture gardening personnel available at most of the locations now, I think. And they're readily available to assist.
So, that's great. And I do have a question here about tree varieties, and I don't know how much you've got in. I know you've done some apple testing, and you've given me some apples to test. So I don't know how far we are into the apple tree. I know there are orchards out there. So
Apples, well, not just apple. Small fruit is a whole other realm that we could discuss on another
okay,
time.
sounds great.
But we have been working on an apple rootstock trial, and it's a project that's in conjunction with the Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers Association, which is a fantastic wealth of knowledge. And we're trying to develop a cold hardy, viable source of apple rootstocks for Alaska. Not just Alaska, but even in northern latitudes.
Well, great. The one thing that I guess it really strikes me as people are trying to figure this out is, how do you suggest they track year after year? Because I don't know if I can remember what I put in what space. So do you have any tricks of the trade? Write some notes, or what's your recommendation?
The best thing to do is have a garden journal. And not only do you know what you've planted where each year, but you can also take notes on the different varieties that you've used, that you've grown. But it's also a fantastic wealth of knowledge for yourself on which ones performed better than others, flavors. It's where you can keep all your notes and go back to it year after year.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know that when from the farm, and even at the PMC when we're out there, we've got the plan from year after year, and we're planning forward, and that's something that I think people, have enough space so they can move those rotations. So, last bit of advice: how small, how big do you, what are people getting into? If there's any scalability you can talk about.
But my only recommendation is plan your size of your garden for your family. because if you get in over your head, then it's not an easy task. You know, there's weeding, there's maintenance, there's, you know, I didn't even talk about irrigation. You know, when you plan your site, make sure you have available irrigation. I know some people who actually haul their water in buckets to their gardens so that they can water, which is, you're talking about more time and more labor. So plan it to where you're able to have a ample size that you can maintain. And if you're able to maintain a large enough space, then make sure that you have the capability of preserving the food. You know, don't let it go to waste. You know, of course, you can donate it to the food banks, you can donate it to friends and family, but if you're looking at growing for yourself and you have the capability of canning and freezing and all of that, then sure, go big.
Right, that's great advice. Our half hour's up. Want to thank Rusty for coming in and giving a quick brief rundown. It'll be on our website, some of these varieties. I think we can post that. Sure. So that people can see. Again, I mean, you got the Master Gardeners, you've got the Ag Extension. There's a lot of resources out there. We just wanted to give you a thumbnail sketch.
And of course, check year after year, because, you know, even CES is continually, I think they have 1 or 2 projects going on still with variety trials.
Excellent.
And hopefully the PMC will be able to start doing some more, but every year you'll probably see new updates.
Good. Yeah, I know we work out at the experiment farm with Jody and the team over there all the time, and
oh yeah,
you know, so ag is a big industry. I want everybody to know that we're all working and supporting each other. So with that, thanks. Have a great day.
And I would like to point out one more thing. I didn't talk about potatoes, and there's a reason. If you want potato information, contact Christine McNicky at the Plant Material Center, and she will be able to help you out in selecting varieties what you're looking for. Not all potatoes do fantastic in Alaska, but she's the one to contact, and she can help you out with that. I didn't even want to touch that because we maintain over 200 varieties of potatoes at the PMC, so she's the one that can handle that one.
Excellent. Glad you added that in, Rusty. Thanks again for coming. Have a great day,
Sure.
folks.
Thanks.
Bye now.